Hi, I'm TERESA ALVARADO, Deputy Administrative Officer with the Santa Clara Valley Water District. Welcome to the People Behind Your Water. Today's topic is groundwater. March is Groundwater Awareness Month, and we'd like to tell you a little bit about the importance of groundwater in Santa Clara County. So joining me today is Garth Hall, Deputy Operating Officer of the Water Supply Division at the Water District, and Vanessa de la Piedra. She is the Unit Manager for Groundwater. So thank you very much for being here. Very excited about Groundwater Awareness Month. Tell us a little bit about groundwater in our county and why it's significant.
So let me answer that, Teresa. So in this county, groundwater, Vanessa will explain the history behind it, but it has long been very important in the county. And today and in the future, about 40% of the water that is used in this county actually passes into and out of the groundwater basin. Our groundwater basin is very much like the big balancing tank, so that in a normal year it is probably filled as much as it is depleted, and a number of the retailers and cities who utilize water supplies in the county actually pump a significant amount of that from the groundwater. The rest of it is delivered by the district as treated water, and there's some hetchy water that also goes. But the groundwater is very important in that regard. So then we get into situations where we get into dry conditions, and that's where the groundwater basin really comes into its own. Because as other supplies become less available, imported water and local runoff in the streams and so on, we draw down significant amounts of that groundwater basin. In fact, by design in our water supply situation, that's the way it should be. It's supposed to be a balancing tank. It helps us balance out. When you get into severe drought, however, we get to the limits, the lower limits of where we can go with that groundwater basin. And so we'll work on ways, and Vanessa will explain ways in which we try to avoid that getting too bad. But overall, in normal cycles of wet, average, and dry, that big balancing tank is enormously effective and powerful in this county.
So before we get into that, if we could take a step back, for those who aren't water resources managers, what is groundwater? Where does it exist? And we're using it for water supply. And then you also mentioned retailers. So maybe, Vanessa, if you could explain those two things and really describe the system a little bit.
Sure. So groundwater is water that's beneath the ground. It's flowing typically very slowly between the pores and cracks in soil and rock. So it's not like an underground river or a lake, especially in this county. It's moving very slowly. And as it's moving through the soil, there is some natural filtration that happens. Not everywhere in the state or the country has good groundwater basins that can provide good yield for well owners. So we're very fortunate to have this very vast groundwater basin beneath our feet.
Okay, so talk a little bit about the history of groundwater in our county.
Sure. So it really is the foundation of our water supply, and it's the reason that the water district exists today. It's sort of the district history is founded in groundwater management. Groundwater has been an important part of the water supply for the county since the 1850s when the first wells were drilled. The use of groundwater was increasing as agriculture was increasing significantly in the early part of the 1900s. And what was happening was there were starting to be pretty large drops in water levels, and people started to notice that the land surface was actually sinking, which is what we call subsidence, from pumping too much groundwater.
Okay.
So what happened was in the 1920s, local farmers and business leaders realized that this wasn't sustainable and there needed to be something done to protect groundwater resources.
So they were digging wells. They were realizing they had to dig farther and farther down to access the groundwater, which was at that point their only source of water for our county.
Right.
And so they founded the water district?
Right, so they came together and formed a plan. Basically, county voters approved the formation of the predecessor of today's water district in 1929. And the early water district efforts were really aimed at trying to halt groundwater overdraft, which is similar to your bank account overdraft, a situation you don't want to have. So it focused on constructing reservoirs to capture local surface water, store that water, and release it through creeks so that it could replenish the groundwater basin.
Great. So Garth, we really started out with talking about how groundwater plays a role in our overall water supply. Maybe now that we have a little bit more context, if you can just talk a little bit again about what percent it plays in our overall water supply.
So it's about 40%. So in terms of the overall supply that passes into and out of the groundwater, on average, it's about 40%. So back when we spoke about the dry year, so that percentage would go up
Okay.
a little bit. So as treated water becomes less available due to restrictions and or unavailability coming through the delta and so on, then a little bit more of the water would be coming from the groundwater. So the usage would tend to go up a little bit.
Okay, so it's a very important source of our water supply. How do we protect it?
So the Water District has a lot of different programs in place and efforts to protect and augment water supplies. First and foremost, in terms of making sure that we have adequate reserves and supplies in the basin, we do manage recharge. We have a very extensive recharge program.
Describe what recharge means. Yeah.
So basically,
Sounds like electricity, but it's not, right?
well, it's replenishing the basin. It is sort of like recharging a battery, right?
Okay.
We draw from the basin, so we want to recharge that or replenish that. So every year we store local surface water in our 10 reservoirs.
Okay.
We also import a very significant amount of water from the Delta. So we store that water. Some of that water goes to our water treatment plants, but a large portion also goes to replenish our basins through a series of recharge ponds and also through creeks.
So are those little lakes that we see dotting the valley?
Yes.
How many do we have, and how much water do they replenish?
We have nearly 400 acres of recharge ponds throughout the county, and yes, those are the ones that you see. They're dry right now if you're out on the roads. And typically we recharge about 100,000 acre feet a year, and an acre foot is about 326,000 gallons, so very large volume of water that we're replenishing each year with local and imported surface water.
Great. So we know that it's an important water bank, especially in dry years. So how is our water supply, groundwater supply, doing this year with a severe drought?
It's been a challenging few years for us here in terms of the ongoing dry conditions. So again, Garth mentioned our groundwater basin is our primary reserve for droughts. And we manage our basin during wet and normal years to replenish it and keep it full so that when we hit these dry years and other supplies are less available, we can draw on our groundwater reserves to help get us through. So we are seeing declining water levels and storage as a result of that situation. So we've seen in 2014, we saw about 80,000 acre feet withdrawn from our groundwater reserve. So it's a pretty significant amount of water that we've taken out of our storage.
So are we at risk of ground subsidence, the sinking of the ground that you mentioned earlier?
So it's an ongoing concern, and it's something that we're tracking very closely in terms of our monitoring of water levels and land subsidence. Historically, there have been up to 14 feet of subsidence that occurred in this county, and that occurred primarily between 1915 and 1970. So some very significant impacts historically, and of course we want to avoid that happening again in this county. So we do monitor very closely. We're not at immediate risk of that. We are approaching some of the thresholds that we've established in terms of land subsidence. So we certainly want to try to preserve our groundwater resources and reduce the demand that we're putting on those.
So we've talked a little bit about protecting the groundwater from pollution and from overuse, the groundwater basin. Last year, I know that California passed groundwater legislation. Can you talk a little bit about that? Is there anything new that will be coming here, or is it work that we're primarily already doing?
Sure. So the intent of the legislation, it was a very comprehensive bill, and it was groundbreaking in that for the first time, groundwater would be managed throughout the state of California for these high and medium priority basins. So basically the intent is for agencies to develop plans to manage groundwater over the long term and achieve sustainability so that they don't have adverse impacts like declining groundwater levels, subsidence, water quality issues. In terms of how it affects us, we're in pretty good shape. We have been managing our basin for over 80 years, and we already have a lot of those programs in place. Like we've talked about the integrated management of groundwater and surface water that really help protect our basins for long-term sustainability. So we're in pretty good shape in terms of the new laws.
Great. So just by comparison, so in other areas, they maybe will rely a lot on surface water or rain captured water that they've captured from rainfall. Other areas may be relying on imported water that comes from the Sierra Nevadas, as we are. But how common is it to have a groundwater basin? I know our area, we're in a fortunate situation. What about other areas?
Well, again, some other areas in the state do have groundwater basins as well and take advantage of that. Many counties and areas only have one source of supply, like you mentioned. Maybe they only have groundwater or they only have surface water supplies. So it sort of puts them more at risk. It's like having all your eggs in one basket, right? We want to try to make sure we have diversity, which we've worked hard here, and the community's made a lot of investments locally to make sure that we have a very diverse water supply portfolio so that we have this increased reliability.
Great. So are these the kinds of things we'll be talking about at the open house in March?
Yes.
So the district is hosting an open house on March 12th.
Right.
In celebration of Groundwater Awareness Week, and we invite the public to come and join us and to learn a little bit more and hear a little bit more and see some great diagrams that really tell the story about water resources. But I want to talk about you two a little bit. The part of what's fun about this show is really conveying to the next generation of water resource users and managers the work that we do here. So Garth, if you could talk a little bit about your background and how you came to the water district.
So my background is civil engineering, and I studied that actually originally in South Africa, and then I did some graduate work at Stanford and got into water resources at PG&E, a utility, and I focused on the hydro area there for a while. When I left PG&E, I did some consulting briefly and then joined East Bay Mud, the entity that's in Oakland, based in Oakland.
East Bay Municipal Utilities District. Yeah.
Correct. And so I spent almost 10 years at East Bay Mud and did a variety of planning work, modeling work, and helped in some tail end elements of developing their big Freeport project, which brings them water from the Sacramento River. So I did a number of things there, and then I joined this district a little short of a year ago. And since then, with the retirement of Joan Maher, who had been the deputy operating officer for many years, very, very prominent person, when she retired, I was appointed in that position, and so I've been in that position now for about 5 months. And
so you came when it was nice and calm, right?
You know, it couldn't have been uncalmer.
Yeah, exactly.
Very exciting time to be here.
Great.
Challenging, but everybody loves a challenge.
Yeah,
And
right.
I do too.
And Vanessa, you were just recently promoted to unit manager of the
Yes.
groundwater unit,
Yes.
but talk about your history here at the district.
Sure. So I started here back in 2000. I started right out of grad school. My educational background is I have a bachelor's degree in geology and then a master's in civil environmental engineering. So good fit for groundwater, which covers both of those areas. So I started as an assistant engineer here at the district in 2000 in the groundwater management unit, and have for most of my time here at the district, I've been working in the groundwater unit with a little bit of time in the at the water supply division level, working on integrated regional planning. But very happy to have been working on groundwater. It's something I'm very passionate about, and it's been a very interesting and great time here.
Well, you know, it's interesting. Obviously, the last year, we're in the fourth year now, entering the fourth year of a very severe, extreme drought. And so how, given that you've been here for several years, 15 now, and you've been through another drought here, right? Well, we were just
Smaller.
coming out of a drought
Right.
when you started. How does this compare?
It's very challenging. Everything's changing every day. It's very dynamic. It's very interesting, but it's very challenging.
And so for folks that are still, you know, in their educational path, what would you say about working in water resources?
Would you like to go there? I'll go with that. It really does have all of the elements that you would want to have in terms of planning and implementation in a utility environment. It's an enormous responsibility. It's also just great to be doing something that you know is so important for the community and the public, even though they count on it every time they take a shower or water their yards and so on. Behind that, it's really great to be able to be looking forward to make sure that it's always there and the quality is right, and that we can also explain the value to the community as we go.
Okay. Vanessa?
I would just say it's fascinating work. It's always evolving. Water in California is always going to be an interesting topic, and there's a new challenge around the corner all the time. So it's been very interesting.
I went to, my undergrad I have a bachelor's in environmental studies and a master's in civil and environmental engineering. But when I was in school, I remember there was a lot of, we studied a lot the groundwater basin and pollution prevention. There were a lot of Superfund sites
Right.
in Silicon Valley, and it seems like we've really come a long way to remedy some of that underground pollution and really regulate that industry such that now we still have a basin that we can rely on.
And there still are a lot of cases. There are several hundred open cases where soil or groundwater has been contaminated by fuel or other contaminants in Santa Clara County. There are still 25 open Superfund sites. However, we're fortunate there have been very limited impacts to deeper drinking water aquifers. And you're right, we have come a long way. Those sites are very well regulated by regulatory agencies. It's something that is definitely on our minds and that we keep track of, and we're watching that. But we're in a much better place now than we were, several decades ago.
Right. So what can the individuals do to protect our groundwater basin? What
I
do
would
we want
say,
folks to do?
first and foremost, with all water, we want people to use water wisely, especially during times like this, during drought. We're encouraging people to reduce their water use. We know people have taken a lot of steps to be more water efficient, and that's great, and we applaud that. We're just asking people to do just a little bit more, take a little bit shorter shower, reduce the irrigation timing on your lawn if you can, just to conserve all the water resources that we have in the county. And also just in terms of pollution prevention, just being thoughtful about how much you apply to your yard in terms of fertilizers or pesticides. Keep in mind that often runs off into creeks or can recharge groundwater basin. So just being mindful of chemical use and water use.
What does the future hold for our groundwater basin?
Well, I think all of the things that Vanessa has said apply to the future as well, but there's something new coming down the road for us, which is pretty exciting. One of the things that this water district has had, as all water districts do, is have long-range plans to make sure that as water use grows and as other supply changes in terms of availability, that we can adapt. And so this district has identified that in the longer run, we need to go more towards enhanced use of our recycled water sources. So recycled water, I think most of the community would have seen it around in the purple pipes. It's fairly well known in irrigation situations in parks and so on. So that recycled water has further to go, because every gallon of recycled water is utilized in lieu of regular treated water or groundwater pump water is something saved for other uses. And so that's one thing. Now, as we proceed down the road with that, it's more economical and highly efficient for us to take that quality of water and notch it up in terms of purification. And so we already have begun to demonstrate that, as many know, down on Zanka Road. The Silicon Valley Advanced Purification Center is doing that and producing about 5,000 or 6,000 acre-feet of water every year of a very highly purified quality. Currently, it's in a testing phase, but we'll be blending that in with the purple pipe water to improve the amount of that and perhaps lower some of the salinity in that for some uses that is valuable to customers. But take us further down the road, when we try to fill the gaps of need in the future, we can take water of that quality, notch it up even yet again to a drinking water standard, which it is almost there now, but we could do additional small amount of work, put it into a drinking water standard. The best path forward then is, having done that, is to put it back into the groundwater. So here we come back to the groundwater and the role of that. So either through percolation ponds in the waste or recharge ponds, like we have to now, just supplement some of that with purified water, and perhaps we could inject some of it through wells that, instead of pumping water out of the ground, are actually re-engineered to pump water back into the ground. So this is a supplemental source for the future. It's highly regulated, highly controlled. The testing and so on that is done before that's approved is unbelievable, but it's a very pure water. It's being done extensively in other parts of the world, notably now in Southern California. So we have that in mind for our future too.
Great. Well, let's work through that a little bit. So I think everybody is familiar with recycling in general. It's a very strong ethic for us. We understand the importance to the environment, and of course with water resources, because they are limited. We're not creating new water. There is no new water on the planet. We're dealing with a finite resource. We're applying technology to clean water for reuse again and again. Is that right?
That's the way it is.
And there are other facilities in other parts of the country and the world that are using this recycled water to blend into the water supply.
That's true.
Okay,
Yeah.
and so for now, we have a new recycled water facility, the Advanced Water Purification Center, which is being used for non-potable, non-drinking purposes, but we're looking at the potential for it to be a future water supply.
Yes, indeed.
Great. So what is the timeline for that? What are we thinking?
So these plans are unfolding relatively fast, and what this drought has brought home to us is that when you have a drought situation, we have one dry year after the other, and in fact, as you mentioned earlier, we're in the fourth year now of a really extended drought, you start to realize the fact some more diversity. So the point that Vanessa made about the diversity of supplies, that's a founding principle for us, and we continue to work with it. More diversity in terms of supplies is very important in a drought. Now, one of the wonderful things about using purified water to supplement the groundwater supplies is it's totally reliable. In any drought situation you can imagine, that water is available for purification in addition to the groundwater, whereas some of the other supplies are slightly less reliable. And so we have found, for example, in this drought, because of the supplies, lack of supplies up in the Sierras, coming down through the Delta, very much reduced in this year and last, we really have seen how much more beneficial it would be to have more diversity within the county.
So right now, I think people see the purple pipe system. We know the new 49er Stadium is receiving a lot of recycled water. There are other projects throughout the county where this purple pipe system is being expanded to use in landscape and industrial processes. But we're really talking about a different quality level of water.
Yeah, this water is extremely pure, and the treatment quality that you go through with the equipment that you have today is unbelievable.
Okay.
That it is as pure as you can get in terms of water supply.
Well, in that regard, our website for our Advanced Water Purification Center is Pure Water for You, for the number and you, the letter. And we do offer tours of the facility so that people can learn more about the recycled water system and purified water system.
Yeah, and it's been so fun to see how the community has responded to that invitation. We just had droves of people going through there and learning a lot. It's really been delightful to see.
Well, hopefully we have droves of people coming to our open house on March 12th. We look forward to telling the story about recycled water and purified water and the groundwater basin and how all these pieces fit together to ensure that we have a reliable, sustainable water supply for Silicon Valley, which is really the bottom line and what we're all here for and here to do. So thank you so much for your time today, and thank you very much for joining us on The People Behind Your Water.